The smell of burnt motor oil and old cigarettes was the smell of Ray Lazarus's whole life. It clung to his hands the way the war clung to everything else. Permanent, invisible, always there when he pressed his knuckles to his nose in the dark. He had the garage on Delphi Street for 3 years after getting out. Wasn't much. 2 lifts, a compressor that wheezed like an old man on stairs, a radio bolted to the wall that only picked up one station clearly, and that station only played music that made people cry. He kept it on anyway. Silence was worse. It was a Tuesday when the black SUV pulled up. He knew it wasn't a customer. Customers knocked. These men just stood outside the roll-up door with their hands at their sides. And the one in front wore a white linen shirt in October, which meant he either didn't feel cold or wanted you to know he didn't. Mr. Lazarus, not a question. Ray wiped his hands on a rag and didn't answer right away. He looked at the 3 of them, took a breath and said, "Shop's closed." The man in the white shirt smiled. His name was Preach. Ray had heard of him. Everyone in the lower district had heard of Preach the way you hear of a storm before it arrives. He worked for someone called the Covenant, which was what the newspapers called the organization. Though nobody in the streets used that word. On the streets they had another name for it, 2 syllables spoken quietly, that Ray had learned meant something closer to a disease than a gang. "Mr. Covenant would like a conversation," Preach said. "I don't have conversations with people whose boss doesn't use his real name." Preach's smile didn't move. "His name is Vale, and you've met him before, whether you knew it or not. Everyone in this city has." Ray set down the rag. "Tell Vale I'm busy." They left. He watched them go and felt the cold settle back into the garage like it had been waiting outside too. He locked up early that night. He should have known that wasn't the end of it. What most people in Delphi didn't know, what the newspapers, the city council, the precinct captains with their clearance rates and their press releases didn't know, was that the Covenant wasn't a gang. It was older than the city, older than the country. The organization had embedded itself in human criminal structures the way a parasite embeds in a host. Quietly, efficiently, making itself look like something that was already supposed to be there. They had been in Rome, in Babylon, in every city that had ever burned. They fed on what humans produced when they were afraid, addicted, and desperate. Neurochemical output, the specific cocktail of dopamine, cortisol, and adrenaline that a human body generated under sustained chemical dependency. The drug was called synth. On the street it looked like vapor. You inhaled it, and for 6 hours you felt something that couldn't be described to anyone who hadn't felt it. Which was the point, because once you felt it, you would do almost anything to feel it again. What the users didn't know was that synth was a 2-way compound. It got in, it got you high, and on the way out it extracted. A microscopic biological payload that carried the neurochemical signature back to a collection node. Thousands of users across the city, each one a tiny generator. Add them up and you had an energy source that could sustain a Vorhai away from their home system for decades. The Vorhai were not demons, they were not gods. They were travelers, very old, from a star system that had gone cold 400 years ago by human reckoning. They had come to Earth by accident, or close enough to accident. They had stayed because they found what they needed. Over time, the most practical among them had learned to pass. The rest had learned to manage those who could. Vale was the most practical of all of them. He had 7 names in 7 languages, all of them meaning something close to the same thing, the one who remains. In his current body, and it was a current body, not his original, he was a tall man in his 50s with pale eyes and the kind of stillness that made people uncomfortable without knowing why. He sat behind a desk in a warehouse on the east side of Delphi, and he had not moved from that desk in 11 months because he was in a phase of consolidation. He needed the city stable. He needed distribution solid. He needed new nodes. He had wanted Ray Lazarus because Ray Lazarus knew every block in the lower district. He had served 2 tours in a theater that no longer had a name in official records, and when he came back, he had built something in the worst neighborhood of a dying city and kept it running through sheer refusal. A man like that, Vale had calculated, would move synth to places the current network couldn't reach. Ray had said no. Vale was not accustomed to no. They came for him on a Wednesday, which was the night Ray stayed late to finish a transmission job for Mrs. Okonkwo on the 4th floor of the Meridian complex, who had 3 kids and couldn't afford a tow. He was under the car when he heard the door. Not the roll-up, the side door. He came out from under the car already moving, already calculating. There were 4 of them, and the 4th one had something in his hand that wasn't a gun. It was smaller, flat, and it emitted a sound below the range of human hearing that Ray felt in his back teeth as a vibration. The air around it looked slightly wrong, like heat shimmer in January. He fought. He got 2 of them on the ground before the device activated fully. When it did, the air left his lungs in a single contracted exhale, and every nerve in his body fired simultaneously, and he was on the floor without knowing how he got there. One of the men crouched beside him. Not Preach, someone else. Colder. Vale says to tell you, the man said, that this city has already been claimed. You should have understood that sooner. The device made a sound like a tuning fork struck against bone, and Ray Lazarus died on the floor of his own garage, alone, with the smell of oil and cold metal, and that one radio station fading out to static. He woke up somewhere that wasn't the garage. The ceiling was wrong. Too high, too dark, and covered in something that moved. Not insects. He lay there long enough to determine it wasn't insects. More like the texture of the ceiling was breathing, slowly the way a lung expands. There was light from somewhere below him, amber gold, emanating from the floor itself, through cracks in what might have been stone, or might have been something that looked like stone. The air tasted like copper and ozone, and something underneath those things that he couldn't name, something that made his hindbrain produce a very specific response. Pay attention. He sat up. He was in his own body. He checked. 2 hands, 10 fingers, both knees, the scar on his left forearm from Fallujah, the notch in his right ear from a piece of shrapnel. He'd never fully gotten the story straight on. His body. He'd been dead and now he was in his body, and he wasn't in the garage. You lasted longer than most, the voice came from across the chamber. It was low, layered, not an echo but actual layering, like 2 voices occupying the same frequency, one slightly behind the other. The figure that went with the voice was standing at the far wall in a posture of waiting, arms loose at its sides, and it was wearing what looked like a man, but looked like one the way a door looks like a wall. Related, not identical, Ray had been to war. He had a catalog of things that scared him arranged in order of severity. And at the top of that catalog was not bullets or explosions, but the specific feeling of being in the presence of something that didn't operate by rules he understood. He felt that now. He sat with it. What are you, he said. Older than the things that killed you. The figure moved. It moved like something that had once studied how humans moved and had gotten close but not all the way there. Older than Vale. Older than the Vorai project on this world. I was here when they arrived. I have been watching them take what doesn't belong to them for longer than your civilization has had writing. That doesn't answer what you are. No. A pause that felt considered. I am what you would call exile. I chose your kind as mine. That was a long time ago. What matters to you now is this. You are not dead. What was done to you was not death in the way you understand it. Vorai killing devices interrupt electrical coherence in organic neural tissue. Given sufficient time and the right environment, coherence can be restored. Ray looked at his hands. You brought me back. I gave your body what it needed to bring itself back. There's a difference. What I gave you is still in you. It will remain in you. I want you to understand what that means before you stand up. What does it mean? The figure moved closer. In the amber light, Ray could see that its face was a face. But behind the eyes something moved that had no name in any language he spoke. It means that, for the rest of your life, which will be considerably longer than it was going to be, you will be carrying a fragment of something very old. It will make you harder to kill. It will make you faster than you were. It will allow you, when you choose, to perceive what the Vorai perceive. Their frequencies, their network, their communication. You will be able to find them. And you want me to do what exactly? I want nothing. I am telling you what you will likely do. Because I have watched your kind for a very long time, and I know what happens when you take something from a human being that he built with his own hands. Ray stood up. The amber light rose slightly when he did, as if responding to him. He felt something in his chest that wasn't quite pain, and wasn't quite electricity. A hum, deep and steady, like a frequency he'd been broadcasting his whole life had finally found a receiver. Vale, he said. Yes, the exile said, among others. Ray looked at the door. Where is this place? 3 blocks from your garage. You've walked past it 1,000 times. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I need to make a stop before I do anything else. I know, Mrs. Okonkwo's car is still on the lift. Something in the exile's layered voice shifted. Ray would not have called it amusement. He would have called it recognition. I know, it said again. He finished the transmission job at 3 in the morning. He didn't turn the radio on. He worked in silence methodically, the way he'd done everything in the field. one thing at a time, each thing complete before the next one started. When he was done, he wiped his hands on the same rag he'd been using for 2 months and hung it on the same nail, and lowered the lift and set the key on the passenger seat where Mrs. Okonkwo would find it. Then he sat on the floor of the garage in the dark and thought. The exile had given him a kind of perception he didn't have words for yet. It had started in the chamber, and it hadn't stopped. A low background awareness, like peripheral vision but not visual. Frequencies. The Vorai communicated in a register below human hearing, the same register that the killing device had used. And now Ray could feel those communications the way you feel bass through a floor. Not words, not yet, but the presence of them, the shape of a network, and the network was everywhere. He sat with that for a long time. Then he thought about what it would mean to try to pull it apart. It wasn't going to be a clean operation. Nothing in his experience was ever clean. You planned for clean, and you planned for what happened when clean fell apart. And you made sure you could live with the second option. He thought about the people in the lower district who used synth, not as statistics but as faces. Older guy on Margrave Street who had the newspaper stand, whose hands shook. The woman in the Meridian complex, 2 floors above Mrs. Okonkwo, who left her curtains open at night. The kid who hung around the bodega on Thrush, who couldn't have been more than 19, and always had that specific look in his eyes. The carved-out look, the look Ray recognized, because he'd seen it in the field on people who'd seen too much and were trying to stop seeing it. All of them generators. All of them fuel. He was angry. He'd been angry since he woke up in the exile's chamber, and he was going to stay angry, and he was going to do something useful with it. He stood up, turned off the light, and locked the garage. Her name was Mira, and she distributed synth in the western blocks under a cover that everyone in the district knew about and nobody talked about, because talking about it had consequences. She was smart, careful, and she had survived 3 years in the Covenant's distribution network by being exactly as visible as she needed to be and no more. She knew Ray Lazarus. She knew him the way everyone in the lower district knew everyone, by sight, by reputation, by the small acts of visible decency that accumulate into a kind of neighborhood standing. She knew he'd done 2 tours. She knew about the garage. She knew he'd turned down Preach, which was the kind of thing that got around. She heard he was dead. She was on the fire escape of her building when she saw him walk up the street below, and the first thing she thought was that she was wrong about what she'd heard. The second thing she thought was that something was wrong with the way he was walking. Not wrong, like injured, wrong like different. Like the air was moving around him slightly differently than it moved around other people. The third thing she thought was that he looked directly up at her fire escape without looking for her first, which was impossible from that angle in that light. "We need to talk," he said. She came down, because she was a person who understood the value of information, and because even in the dark, he looked like something had changed in him at a level she couldn't name, and because she had been distributing synth for 3 years and watching what it did, and she was tired in a way that went all the way down. He told her what he knew. Not everything, not the chamber, not the exile, enough. Enough that the color left her face and didn't come back, because she had moved enough synth to know the numbers, and the numbers had never made sense on a business level. The margins were wrong, the volume was wrong, the way the Covenant prioritized certain demographics over others was wrong. She had told herself it was just criminal inefficiency. She had known it wasn't. "How much of the network do you know?" he asked. "More than is safe to know." Good. He looked at her the way he'd looked up at the fire escape, directly without searching. "You can choose. I'm not recruiting. I'm not Vale. I'm telling you what I'm doing, and I'm asking if you want out before it gets complicated." She looked at him for a long time. In the amber light from the street lamp, she could see something in his eyes that hadn't been there the last time she'd seen him across the street. Something behind the brown. Something that moved the way the ceiling in the exile's chamber moved. Deep and slow, and very old. She said, "I know where the primary collection node is." He said, "Show me." The Vorai had 17 nodes distributed across the city. Mira knew 4 of them directly and could infer 3 more from distribution patterns. The exile, when Ray returned to the chamber the following night, confirmed all 7 and added 6 more. The remaining 4 Ray would find by moving through the network's frequency the way you move through a crowd. By feel. By the specific pressure change when you got close to a concentration. He spent 2 weeks learning. He spent those weeks the way he'd spent the first days back from each deployment. Quietly, internally, building a map in his head with coordinates and contingencies and the specific textures of failure. He slept 4 hours a night. He ate at the diner on Cresswell where the owner, Dolo, made jerk chicken on Thursdays and never asked questions. He fixed 4 more cars in the garage because people needed their cars fixed. Preach came to find him on the 9th day. He stood in front of the garage in his white shirt and looked at Ray the way you look at something that shouldn't be standing. There are stories, Preach said, going around the lower district. People like stories. People are saying you're walking around. I'm walking around. Preach's jaw tightened. Something behind his eyes moved the way Vale's men's eyes moved, the slight wrongness. The specific quality of something piloting the face rather than wearing it. Not fully Vorhai. Something in between. Made, not born. Vale wants to know how. Ray picked up a wrench from the work table, not to use it, just to have something in his hand. Tell Vale I'll come to him when I'm ready. You don't. Tell him. He turned back to the car. Tell him I know where the nodes are. Tell him I know about the collection frequency. Tell him that what he used to kill me is now walking around in me, and I'm getting better at it every day. Tell him all of that. And then tell him I said, patience is a human virtue, and I've had a lot of time to practice it. Preach left. The network shifted that night. Ray felt it like a change in air pressure. Vale was consolidating, pulling resources toward the central hub on the east side, preparing. Good. Easier to address one location than 17. The thing about fighting entities that weren't human was that almost every tactical manual ever written was wrong. Not useless, the fundamentals held, the physics held, the basic geometry of bodies in space held. But the assumptions were wrong. Human fighters feared death. Human fighters experienced pain in ways that modulated behavior. Human fighters had an off switch, a point at which the calculus of survival overrode everything else. The Vorhai didn't have that switch. They had a different one, a coherence threshold, the Exile had called it, a point at which a Vorhai body stopped functioning, not because it was damaged, but because the information density required to maintain the physical form exceeded available capacity. Think of it like a computer overheating, not broken, just overwhelmed. The way to cross that threshold, the Exile had explained, was to introduce enough chaotic data into a Vorhai's sensory field simultaneously that the processing system couldn't compensate. In practice, this meant confusion. In practice, this meant exactly the kind of fast, unpredictable, improvised chaos that human fighters defaulted to when the plan fell apart, which, in Ray's experience, was most of the time. He went to the East Side hub alone. This was the choice Mira argued against most forcefully, and he listened to her argument, and he understood the logic of it, and he went alone anyway. Not because he didn't trust her. Because what was in him now, the fragment of the Exile's energy, the Vorhai frequency perception, amplified in proportion to how close he was to a collection node. In a group, the frequencies would interfere with each other. Alone, he could read the building the way you read a room you've been in 100 times. The exits, the weight distribution, the pressure points. He walked in through the loading dock at 4 in the morning. There were 6 of them on the first floor. He took 30 seconds per encounter and moved on. The fragment in his chest burned each time he accessed it. Not painfully, but intensely, the way a muscle burns when you push it past its usual range. He'd been pushing it for 2 weeks. He had a better sense now of how far it went. The second floor was where the collection equipment was. He'd seen the Exile's description of it, and nothing about the reality was worse than expected, which was its own kind of bad. 4 cylindrical structures approximately 2 meters tall, each one connected by tubes to a central processing unit, and inside each structure, a kind of suspended atmosphere that contained the harvested neurochemical output of thousands of human users. They glowed faintly the same amber gold as the Exile's chamber, and the frequency they emitted was the highest concentration of voice signal Ray had encountered. The moment he stepped into the room, it was like stepping into a wall of sound that only he could hear. He stood in that for a moment. He let his nervous system adjust. He thought about Mrs. Okonkwo's transmission. He thought about the kid at the bodega. He thought about a specific morning in Fallujah when everything had gone wrong and he had made a decision to keep moving anyway, and kept moving, and eventually gotten to the other side of it. Then he found the structural supports of the collection unit and went to work. Vale came to the second floor at 4:47 in the morning, which Ray had anticipated because the Exile had told him Vale did not delegate the protection of the collection equipment to anyone. It was the one thing he came out from behind his desk, for he stood in the doorway and looked at what Ray had done to the room. "You should be dead," Vale said. "I was." Ray was standing in the center of the room with the ember fragment running hot in his chest, his hands loose at his sides. It didn't take. Bill's stillness was different from Preach's stillness. It was ancient and complete, the stillness of something that had existed long enough that time had stopped being an emergency. He looked at Ray with his pale eyes and Ray looked back. And what Ray felt in the Vorhai frequency was not anger, and not fear but something that translated closest to calculation. What the Emberborn gave you, Vale said, is a fragment, a shard. You don't understand what you're carrying. Understand enough, it will consume you. Over years, over decades, it will restructure your biology in ways that Vale. Ray took a breath. His voice was level, quiet, the voice he used in the garage when a job was going to take longer than expected, and he wanted to be honest about it. I went to war. I came back. I built something with my hands in the worst part of a city that didn't want me to succeed, and I kept it running for 3 years. Last month your people killed me on my own floor. He took a step forward. I was angry about a lot of things before that. Now I'm angry about more things. And I have found, over the course of my life, that I'm very, very good at staying angry for a long time and not making mistakes because of it. Vale's calculation shifted. Ray felt it in the frequency. A spike, a reassessment. The first sign of something that wasn't quite fear but was adjacent to it. Your kind, Vale said, is not supposed to be capable of this. Which part? Any of it. The refusal, the continuation after death, the pause, the patience. Resi stepped over the remains of the first collection cylinder, which had taken him 11 minutes to dismantle, and had released its neurochemical contents into a neutralizing compound the exile had given him in a small metal container that looked like a flask, and which he had used on all 4 cylinders. You've been here 400 years and you still don't know what you're dealing with. We know your species very well. No. He was close now. 5 feet. The fragment was at full burn. Not painful, simply present. A fire banked exactly right. You know how we act when we're afraid and desperate and dependent. You engineered that. You know what people are like when you've already broken them down. He stopped. You don't know what we're like when we decide we're done. The fight lasted 4 minutes. It was not graceful. Vale was 400 years old in a body that had been designed for durability, and his physical capacity exceeded Ray's in almost every technical metric. He was faster in a straight line, stronger in a direct application of force, and experienced in ways that Ray couldn't fully account for. But he operated on a model. He had a response tree, derived from 4 centuries of dealing with human resistance, and that tree had branches for almost everything. For weapons, for group tactics, for political opposition, for the kind of desperate, violent outburst that humans produced when cornered. It didn't have a branch for a man who had come back from the dead and spent 2 weeks carefully mapping every weakness in the Vorhai network, and was now precisely, methodically, implementing that map in a way that had no emotional content in it whatsoever. No rage, no desperation, just the specific quality of a person who had made a decision and was following through on it 1 step at a time. The coherence threshold, the exile had said. Overwhelming chaotic input. Ray had understood this as a tactical concept. What it meant in practice was this: do not fight Vale the way a human fights. Do not attack a central point and hope for a knockout. Instead, introduce noise, change the frequency. Do 6 things simultaneously that require 6 different responses. And when the 7th gap opens, the gap that the Vorhai processing system creates when it's allocating resources across too many threat vectors, walk through it. The gap opened 2 minutes and 40 seconds in. Ray walked through it. He came out of the east side building at dawn, when the light was the color of the amber in the exile's chamber, and the street was empty, except for the first delivery trucks beginning their rounds. He sat on the curb across the street and let the fragment cool down. His phone had a message from Mira. Still standing? He typed back. Come see the warehouse on Carver. Bring people you trust. The collection nodes went offline over the following 6 days. Not all at once. 1 ton at a time, each one a small operation, each one carefully planned and carefully executed. Mira knew 4. Ray had the rest from the exile's map. 2 of them had Vorhai presence that required the kind of attention the East Side hub had required. The others were automated. Human technology running a Vorhai payload. And once you knew what you were looking at, human technology was something you could address with a wrench and a purpose. The lower district noticed. Not the mechanism. They didn't know about Vorhai or collection frequencies or 400-year-old entities operating out of a warehouse. They knew that the Covenant's distribution was fragmenting. They knew that synth was getting harder to find. They knew that 3 of the Covenant's physical locations had been hit in a week, and nobody was taking credit, and nobody seemed to know who was responsible. And this was stranger than anything, because in the lower district, everyone always knew who was responsible for everything. The kid from the bodega knocked on the garage door on the 5th day. Ray opened it. The kid was 19, maybe 20, and had the carved-out look Ray had cataloged that first night. The look of someone who'd been using something that was using them back. He had his hands in his pockets, and he looked at Ray with the specific combination of need and embarrassment that Ray recognized from his own reflection in the first months after coming home. "I heard you might know something," the kid said. "About getting off the synth." Ray looked at him for a moment. Then he opened the door wider and said, "Come in. I'll put some coffee on." The exile found Ray in the garage 3 days after the last node went dark. It came in the way it always came, with that specific quality of having been in the room longer than Ray knew about. He was under a car again, a different car, another neighbor's vehicle in need of work that it couldn't afford to pay for. "The network is fractured," the exile said. "I know." Ray came out from under the car, sat up, looked at the ceiling. How long before they rebuild? Years, perhaps a decade, perhaps longer. The infrastructure damage is significant, but more significantly, Vale understood something at the end that he had not understood before. The network depends on a specific kind of human. Isolated, dependent, stripped of the sense that they can affect anything. He understood that this city no longer fits that profile, at least in these districts. "That's not me. That's the neighborhood." Yes, the exile's layered voice had same quality it had had in the chamber when Ray had mentioned Mrs. Okonkwo's car. Not amusement, recognition. That was always the point. Ray wiped his hands and stood up and looked at the exile, really looked, the way he hadn't allowed himself to in the chamber, when there was too much to process. What was in it? What it was really, underneath the form it wore. "You've been here since they arrived," he said. "Tss. You watched them for 400 years. Yes. Why didn't you?" He stopped. Reconsidered. Asked the right question instead of the obvious one. "What were you waiting for?" The exile was quiet for a moment that felt very long. "Vale was wrong about many things," it said finally. "But he was not wrong that your kind, under the conditions he created, was not capable of this. He made a calculation about human nature under duress. He has made that calculation successfully, in many cities, over many centuries. The isolation was a feature. The dependency was engineered. The helplessness was not an accident. I know. What he did not account for, what he had never needed to account for before, was the exception. The node that doesn't follow the network's rules. The individual who, under conditions that should produce despair, produces something else." The exile paused. "Something that looks like stubbornness from the outside. Something that looks like anger wielded carefully over time." Ray thought about that. He thought about all the mechanics of it. The refusing, the dying, the coming back, the 2 weeks of patient mapping, the walking into the warehouse at 4 in the morning with a plan and a piece of something ancient in his chest. He thought about it, and what he felt was not pride, exactly. It was something simpler. The feeling you got when a job that had been hard to diagnose finally became clear, and the repair turned out to be something you had the tools for all along. "What happens now?" he said. "The fragment remains in you. It will not diminish. You will carry it until you choose to release it. And releasing it is a thing you can do only once. And I would suggest waiting until you understand the full range of what you're carrying." Meant for the city. Ah. Again that quality in the voice. For the city. The city does what cities do when they're no longer being harvested. They recover. Slowly, unevenly. With setbacks and reversals and the ordinary difficulties of ordinary human complexity. A pause. "But they recover. I have seen it." Ray turned back to the car. "I've got 3 more jobs this week," he said. "I know. If you want to help, you can hand me the torque wrench." The exile looked at the tool hanging on the wall. At the garage with its 2 lifts and its wheezing compressor and its 1 radio station. At Ray Lazarus, veteran and mechanic, who had been killed and come back and broken a 400-year-old alien empire in 11 days and now needed to fix someone's car. It took the torque wrench off the wall and handed it over. "I have," it said, "occasionally wondered what your kind would be capable of if you fully understood what you are." Ray slid back under the car. The amber morning light came through the roll-up door, and the compressor wheezed, and the radio picked up its 1 station and played something that, for once, did not make anyone cry. "We're capable of plenty," he said. "We just need a reason." He got to work.